The probe came back wrong again. Director Orvin held the data pad with both hands and stared at the numbers. Not blank numbers. Not missing numbers. Numbers that existed, that were real, but that made no sense at all. The probe had been sent into human space to do one simple thing: measure. That was all. Measure biological output, scan population density, record environmental stress levels, return. Every other probe sent to every other species in the Union had done exactly that without trouble. This was the 9th probe sent to Earth. The 9th one to come back with readings outside the normal range. Not slightly outside, completely outside. The scale the Galactic Measurement Authority used went from 0 to 10. The probes were recording numbers above 10 in categories that had never gone above 10 in 800 years of galactic record keeping. Orvin set the pad down on his desk and looked out the wide observation window of the GMA orbital station. Below him, the gray-white surface of the neutral world, Drevos Prime, stretched out in silence. Up here, everything was clean and organized. Up here, things made sense. The humans had been in the Galactic Union for 31 years. They had not started any wars. They had ended several. They had shown up to diplomatic meetings with drinks called coffee and offered them to everyone in the room, including species that could not consume liquid. They smiled a lot. They laughed loudly. They were small, soft-bodied, and lived extremely short lives compared to most Union members. They should have been easy to measure. Orvin called his senior analyst, a Diluvian named Counselor Brix, and showed him the data. Brix had 4 arms and used all of them to scroll through the report once. His wide blue face stayed flat and unimpressed for a long time. Then one of his eyebrows moved. "Calibration error," Brix said. "I thought that on probe 3, Orvin replied. "And 4, and 5. Then send a better probe." "I sent the best probe the Authority has. It returned the same data as the others." Brix handed the pad back. "Then the humans broke it somehow." "They did not touch it. The probes operate in orbit. The humans do not have the means to interfere with them." "Then the data is wrong." Orvin looked at him steadily. "That is what I believed. But Brix, what if the data is not wrong? What if the readings are correct and it is the scale that is broken?" That question sat in a room for a long time. The Union used something called the Power Index Scale, or PAS. It ranked every known species across 4 categories: physical strength, mental speed, emotional control, and survival ability. The scores from all 4 were combined into a single number. That number decided where a species sat in the Union. It decided how much territory they were given, how many seats they held on the council, how seriously their words were taken in a room full of other species. Every living species in the Union had a score. The Maruvians scored 8.4. The Pelavari hive mind scored 9.1. The Groovian war beasts, which were large enough to swallow a human whole and had been at war with 3 species before joining the Union, scored 8.7. The machines would not give humanity a number. They gave errors. They gave overflow readings. They gave values that the scale had no name for. Orvin called a session with the full GMA council that afternoon. He explained the problem plainly. 9 probes, 9 sets of impossible data. The room argued for 2 hours. Some believed the probes were defective. Some believed the humans were cheating somehow, though no one could explain how. One member suggested that humanity simply did not fit any known category and that the score should be left blank. Brix rejected that immediately. Every species gets a score. The Union runs on scores. If the humans do not have a score, we cannot place them. We cannot work with them properly. We cannot trust them properly. They need a number. The vote was quick. They would send a live team to Earth. Real observers, not probes. People who could watch, ask questions, and return with data that made sense. The machines had failed. Eyes would have to do the job instead. After the session ended, Orvin found the human liaison officer waiting outside the chamber door. Her name was Sorinadel. She was short, dark-haired, and holding a small cup of something hot. She had been a Union's human contact for 3 years, and she was always calm in a way that Orvin found slightly unsettling. She smiled when she saw him. "How did it go?" "We are sending a field team to Earth," he said. "Good idea," she said simply. He looked at her for a moment. "You knew the probes were failing." I heard something like that, yes. Does that not concern you? Sora thought about it for a second. She sipped from her cup. Not really, she said, but I think it might concern you more before the trip is over. She walked away down the corridor, unhurried, leaving Orvin standing alone with a data pad full of numbers that should not exist and a feeling he could not quite name. He looked down at the pad again. 9 probes, 9 errors. The scale built to measure the power of every living thing in the galaxy. And one small, soft species from one small wet planet had quietly broken it 9 times without even trying. He marked the file for the field team and wrote one note at the top that IT said, "Proceed carefully." The field team landed in a harbor city on the northern coast of Earth on a Tuesday. They had chosen a city because cities were where most humans lived and where behavior patterns would be easiest to study. Tevarun, the junior Diluvian analyst on the team, had read 47 reports about human cities before the landing. She believed she was prepared. She was not prepared. The first thing that hit her was the noise. Not dangerous noise, just constant noise. Voices, machines, music from open windows, children shouting somewhere nearby, wind, birds, the deep, low sound of water against stone. All of it at once, layered together, and none of it causing any visible distress in the humans walking through it. They moved through the noise like it was nothing, like silence was the strange thing, and this was simply how the world sounded. Halko, the team's senior field agent, was a Maruvian. He was stone-skinned and nearly 3 meters tall and had measured 40 species across 30 years of field work. He had never once written an emotional observation in a report. Facts only, numbers only. He stood on the harbor walkway and watched the city move around him and said nothing for almost 4 minutes. Then he said, "There are too many of them doing too many different things at the same time." "That is the point," Sora said from beside him. She had come along as their guide. "How do they organize it?" Teva asked. "Mostly they just do," Sora said. Teva opened her scanner. They started with the first standard test, stress response measurement. The idea was simple. A mild simulated threat would be introduced into the environment, and the biological response of nearby humans would be recorded. Heart rate, cortisol, adrenaline, neural output. Basic numbers. The GMA had done this test on every species it had ever measured without a single machine failure. Teva aimed the scanner at a group of humans near a food stall, activated the stress simulation, and waited. The scanner ran for 11 seconds. Then it displayed a number so high that Teva assumed it was a malfunction. She reset it and tried again. The second number was even higher. She switched to the backup unit. The backup unit gave a result that she stared at for a long time without speaking. "What does it say?" Halko asked. "It says," Teva paused. "It says their stress response is active right now, before the simulation. They are already in a stress state. They look perfectly calm," Halko said. The humans near the food stall were laughing about something. "I know," Teva said. Halko took the scanner and examined it. He ran a full diagnostic. The machine was working perfectly. The readings were correct. The humans standing 20 meters away, laughing and eating and leaning on a railing over the water, were operating with a baseline stress level that would have indicated severe crisis in any other species he had ever tested. And they were fine. They were happy, if anything. Their normal state is already past what we consider a stress threshold, Teva said quietly. The simulation cannot push them further because they're already above the ceiling. Down the walkway, Drin, the small insectoid data recorder on the team, was attempting the emotional spectrum scan at a separate location. There was a gathering there, a group of humans dressed in dark clothes, standing around something. Some of them were crying. Some of them were talking softly. Some of them were actually smiling, and Drin could not understand why. Because the crying humans and the smiling humans were standing right next to each other, and sometimes they were the same person at different moments. Drin's emotional spectrum scanner was built to read one primary emotional state at a time and record it. A species was either in a state of grief or a state of calm, fear or confidence, anger or peace. These states could shift quickly, but they did not exist simultaneously in a healthy biological organism. except they apparently did in humans. Dren's scanner attempted to classify the emotional output of one human standing at the center of the group. The human was crying steadily, but also had one arm around another human and was telling a story that made the people nearby laugh. The scanner tried to categorize this. It tried 3 times. Then it shut itself off. Dren looked at the blank screen and then looked back at the human. The human did not notice. He kept telling his story. People kept laughing. Some kept crying. None of it seemed to bother any of them. Later, near the edge of the city, Teva watched a group of human children playing in an open square. She watched them run, argue, fall down, help each other up, argue again, and then suddenly all cooperate to do something together without any clear signal being given. No leader emerged. No order was issued. They just shifted from competing to cooperating as naturally as breathing. Her behavioral prediction model ran an analysis. It tried to estimate the probability of the next action each child would take based on prior behavior patterns. It generated a prediction. The prediction was wrong. It generated another. Wrong again. After 12 failed predictions in 4 minutes, the model flagged itself as unreliable and stopped running. Teva wrote in her notes, "Human behavior does not follow predicted patterns. Will require more observation." Then she crossed it out and wrote, "Human behavior may not follow any patterns." That night, Halko sent his first field report back to Director Orvin. He kept it short. He had measured 40 species in 30 years. He had never sent an emergency report before. This was his first. The subject line said, "The machines are not broken. Something else is wrong." Orvin spent 2 days going through the corrupted data from all 9 probes before he saw it. He had been looking at the numbers as errors. That was the natural assumption. A number outside the expected range on a reliable instrument meant the instrument had failed. But instruments failed in specific ways. They dropped to 0, or they locked on one value, or they gave random static. They did not give consistent, impossible numbers across 9 different probes of 9 different models over 3 years of attempts. He pulled the data from all 9 probes and laid it side by side on his work screen. He looked at the biological output readings from probe 1 and compared them to probe 9. They were not random. They were not 0. They were not locked. They were consistent. They were pointing in the same direction each time, scaling slightly upward with each new probe as the instruments improved and could read deeper. The machines were not broken. They were recording correctly. The values were simply above what the scale had been designed to hold. Orvin leaned back in his chair. He stayed there for a long time, without moving, that he pulled the Union's historical records for humanity next. 31 years of contact. He read through the list of interstellar conflicts that had occurred during that time. There had been 14. Humanity had started 0 of them. Humanity had been involved in 7 by proximity or alliance. Humanity had helped end 11, including for that had not involved them at all. In 3 of those 4 cases, no one had asked them to help. They had simply shown up. He opened the pre-contact records. Humanity's own history, submitted to the Union archives when they joined. He began reading. He read for 6 hours. At some point, he stopped taking notes and just read. He read about a species that had suffered through plagues that killed nearly a third of its population and then rebuilt its cities within 2 generations. He read about wars that had burned entire continents and the people who had survived them and gone on to form schools, write music, and plant gardens in the ruins. He read about famines, floods, ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and a near-extinction event caused by their own weapons, an event they had pulled themselves back from by choosing, slowly and imperfectly, to cooperate. Every time something destroyed them, they built again. Not the same thing. Something new. Sometimes something better. Always something that he found himself thinking of the Pelavari, the hive mind species that scored 9.1 on the power index scale. They had survived a system-wide catastrophe 4,000 years ago and gone dormant for 3 centuries before recovering. Orvin had always considered that remarkable. The greatest survival story in Union history. Humanity had survived at least 11 comparable events. None of their recovery periods had exceeded 50 years. They did not go dormant. They did not wait. They grieved and then they worked. Meanwhile, on Earth, Teva was visiting a military training base at Sora's suggestion. She stood at the edge of a training field and watched human soldiers run drills. She had visited Maruvian combat training before, and Gruvian war beast conditioning facilities, and Pelavari tactical high formations. She knew what military power looked like. Human soldiers were not impressive by those standards. They were small. They were slow compared to most species. They tired quickly and had a rest. What they did not do was stop. The instructor at the base was a quiet woman named Run who had served for 22 years. Teva asked her what the goal of human military training was. Rin thought about it. To make sure that when everything goes wrong and everyone is exhausted and scared and wants to quit, Rin said, they don't quit. That is the goal. Not speed, not strength. Those help, Rin said. But the enemy has those too. The real question is who keeps going when they shouldn't have to anymore. Teva wrote that down word for word. Back on the station, Orvin called his colleague Dren and asked about the emotional scanner failure from the funeral. Dren explained what had happened. The human had been expressing grief and humor simultaneously, and the machine had not been able to categorize it. What does that mean biologically? Orvin asked. It means they can hold two opposite emotional states at the same time without destabilizing, Dren said. Our models assume that is not possible. Every model we have says that level of internal contradiction should cause psychological breakdown. But it did not. No, they do it regularly. They call it healing. Orvin added that to his notes. He had a growing document that was no longer titled Calibration Errors. He had quietly changed the title 3 days ago. It was now titled Open Questions. That evening, Sora found him in the station's observation lounge. He was staring out at the stars. She sat down nearby without being asked. She did not say anything for a while, which he appreciated. You read our history, she said eventually. Not a question. Yes. Most species stop after the first few centuries, she said. It gets depressing. It is not depressing, Orvin said. That is the strange part. I kept expecting it to be depressing, and it never was. Sora smiled at the stars. Yeah, she said. We noticed that too. Orvin looked at her. Did you ever consider what you are? She seemed to think about the question seriously. We think about it sometimes, she said. We just usually have other things to do. He nodded slowly and looked back at his open document. He added one more line at the bottom. It said, the scale was built for what species can do. It was not built for what they choose to do with it. Counselor Brix wanted a number. He said it plainly at the start of the emergency council session. The GMA had been established 800 years ago to provide the Union with clear, measurable data on every species. The Power Index scale had guided treaties, territorial agreements, defense budgets, and diplomatic seating arrangements for longer than most current member species had existed. It worked because it was consistent. Every species got a number. The number was trusted. The system ran. Give me a number for the humans, Brix said, or tell me why you cannot. Orvin stood at the front of the chamber with his data display behind him. He had been preparing for this session for 3 days. He had the probe data, the field reports from Teva and Halko and Dren, his own historical research, and a 40-page preliminary analysis. He had everything except the one thing Brix was asking for. I cannot give you a number, Orvin said, because the number does not exist in the range our scale covers. Then expand the range. I considered that. The problem is we do not know where the top of the range should be. We cannot set a ceiling for a value we do not understand yet. Brix's forearms folded in a way that meant he was unhappy. Every other species was measurable. Every other species outputs power in ways we design the instruments to detect. Physical strength, neural processing speed, emotional stability scores, environmental survival rates. These are consistent categories. Every species fits into them. He brought up the first display. The humans do not fit, not because they score low, because they score differently depending on conditions. A Maruvian in a high-stress scenario scores approximately 8.4 across all categories. Consistent, predictable. A human in the same scenario, and our field team ran 12 scenario tests, scored between 6.1 and 14.7 depending on variables we could not control or predict in advance. The chamber was quiet. 14.7 is not on the scale, said one of the other council members. No, Orvin agreed. It is not. That afternoon, Teva submitted her supplemental report. She had spent the last week not running tests. She had been watching. Orvin read it twice before the session resumed, and then he asked her to present it herself. Teva stood before the council. She was younger than most people in the room, and she was aware of it, but she had learned something in the last week that she could not unlearn, and she was not willing to summarize it badly. She told them about the hospital. She had gone alone, with Sora's guidance, and spent half a day in a ward where humans who were very sick were being cared for by humans who were not paid very much and had no biological connection to the sick people at all. Strangers caring for strangers. She had watched a nurse sit with a dying man for 40 minutes at the end of a long shift, holding his hand and talking to him softly, because he had no family nearby and should not be alone. The nurse had already worked 11 hours. The nurse stayed anyway. I ran an analysis, Tevis said. By our models, this behavior is self-defeating. It costs energy, time, and emotional resources with no direct return. No genetic advantage. No social debt being repaid. The nurse did not know this man. She would likely never see him again. And yet, she moved to the next slide. I then visited a memorial site for a human conflict that ended 200 years ago. The conflict killed several million humans. The memorial was maintained by volunteers, people who had no living relatives from that war, tending the memorial every week because they believed the dead should be remembered. I asked one of them why he did it. He said because someone should. The chamber was very quiet now. Our behavioral models assume all action is driven by self-interest or group interest or instinct. These models work for every species we have measured. They do not work for humans consistently. Humans act against self-interest regularly, not out of error or confusion, but out of what they call principle. They have words for it. They use them casually. Words like duty, decency, the right thing. She looked at Bricks directly. The power index scale measures capacity. It measures what a species can do. It is not. It was never designed to measure what a species decides to do with that capacity when there is nothing forcing the decision. Humans decide, constantly, in directions that are statistically self-sacrificial. And they do not experience this as loss. They experience it as meaning. She sat down. Halco, who had not spoken yet in the session, added a single line to the official record. He did not stand to say it. He just said it from his seat in a flat, quiet voice. I have measured 40 species. I'm not sure this one fully understands what they are. I'm also not sure they need to. After the session, Bricks found Sora in the corridor. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment in the way his species did when they were recalculating something. Your analyst, he said. The nurse story. Yes, Sora said. Is that common? For your people? Sora thought about it. Common enough that we build hospitals, she said. Bricks walked away without responding. But he did not call for another vote on the number. Not that day. The simulation was Brix's idea. He proposed it at the following session with the logic that if instruments could not measure humanity under normal conditions, a controlled crisis environment might produce data that was at least usable. The Union Council had authorized it. The human government had agreed, after Sora explained the purpose. 3 cities. A large-scale infrastructure failure scenario. Controlled variables, observed outcomes, real data. Orvin had agreed reluctantly. He was not sure what they expected to find that field observation had not already shown them. But a simulation was concrete. A simulation gave numbers. And Bricks needed numbers. The scenario activated at 9 in the morning, local time, across 3 mid-sized human cities simultaneously. Power grid failure, communication disruption, and a supply scarcity variable in the food distribution network. Nothing physically dangerous. No fires, no flooding, no injuries built into the model. Just systems failing and people suddenly without the infrastructure they depended on. The GMA observation team watched from a mobile command unit parked outside the first city. The T 6 minutes in, before any government emergency response had been coordinated, Teva's screens lit up with activity she had not expected. Informal communication networks were activating across the city, not through official channels, not through systems the simulation had left running, through neighbors talking to neighbors, through people walking to nearby streets and knocking on doors, through someone with a working radio in a hardware shop who began broadcasting general updates on a local frequency. "That is not in the scenario design," said one of the GMA technicians. "No," Teva said, "that T20 minutes, the resource distribution variable, was showing unexpected movement. People from the district least affected by the supply disruption were physically moving food and water toward the districts most affected. Not government trucks, not official aid. People with bags and carts and personal vehicles, choosing to take from their own supply and move it towards strangers who had less. Dren's sacrifice prediction model returned a null result. It had not been designed for voluntary, uncoordinated, mass self-reduction of personal resources in a non-survival critical scenario. Halko was watching a street 2 blocks from the main disruption zone. A man, middle-aged, not visibly athletic, wearing ordinary clothes, had picked up an elderly woman who had fallen near a collapsed market stall. The woman was not injured, just shaken and unable to walk well on the uneven debris. The nearest aid station was 3 kilometers away. The man carried her. His biometric readings were being captured by the passive field sensors. His cortisol was extremely high. His heart rate was elevated to a level that in most species would indicate the edge of physical failure. His body was telling him clearly that he was under enormous strain, that he did not put her down. He adjusted his grip, asked her something that made her smile, and kept walking. Halko watched this for a long time, without speaking. In the second city, Teva's screen flagged something unusual in the youngest population sector. A group of children between the ages of 7 and 12, unsupervised, had organized themselves into a supply relay. Older ones carrying heavier loads, younger ones running messages between groups, one girl who appeared to be about 10 standing in an intersection and directing the others with calm, clear hand signals. Teva stopped taking notes. She watched the screen. She did not know what she would have written anyway. The simulation ended after 4 hours. The machines had generated more data than the station's systems could process in a standard cycle. Orvin stood in the command unit looking at the volume readout and felt something he had not expected to feel in a professional setting, which was a kind of quiet vertigo. He had the data. There was more of it than they had ever collected on any species in one session. And he already knew, looking at the raw figures, that the number they would produce would not fit on the existing scale. Halko sat down in one of the unit's chairs, which was unusual. Halko did not usually sit during field operations. He sat now and looked at his hands for a moment. "The Grivian War beasts," he said. "The ones that scored 8.7. I measured them in a resource competition trial. They fought each other, directly and efficiently. I understood the result completely." He looked up at the screen where the man carrying the woman had long since disappeared around a corner. "I understood it because I recognized the logic. Scarcity, competition, aggression. I have seen it in 40 species. It is always the same." He paused. "What I watched today has no logic I was built to recognize." Orvin nodded. "We built the scale wrong." Halko said that IT was the first time in 30 years of field work that he had questioned the methodology. Orvin did not disagree. That night, he sat alone in the command unit after the others had gone to rest. He had the data open in front of him. He had space for one line in the summary field of the official report, where the power index score was supposed to go. He did not write a number. He wrote, "If a species is capable of understanding its own limits, and then chooses to exceed them without being asked, does the number still matter?" He saved the file and looked at the question for a long time. Outside, in the city that had lost its power for 4 hours, the lights were already coming back on. The final report was 4,012 pages long. Orvin presented it to the full Galactic Union Council on a gray morning in the main chamber of the GMA headquarters station. He had spent 3 weeks writing it. Teva had contributed 600 pages. Halko had contributed 1 page, which Orvin considered the most important page in the document. Dren had submitted raw data appendices that added another 800 pages and a note that said, "I do not know what these numbers mean. I'm not sure any existing framework can tell us." The power index score section of the report was 4 words long. Indeterminate. Scale requires redesign. Bricks read those 4 words and was quiet for a long time. Then he was not quiet that he spoke for 11 minutes about the importance of consistency, about the 800 years the PIS had functioned without failing, about treaties and allocations and diplomatic standings and the fundamental order of the Union, which depended on every species having a number. A number meant a place. A place meant a function. A function meant peace. This was how the galaxy worked. Orvin waited for him to finish. Then he said, "I understand. And I asked the council to watch something before we vote." He played 15 minutes of footage from the simulation. No narration, no data overlay, no graphs or comparative analyses. Just the footage. The man carrying the woman 3 kilometers, the children directing supplies at the intersection, the nurse sitting with the dying man after 11 hours of work, the volunteers at the memorial who came every week because someone should, the informal networks lighting up across 3 cities in under 6 minutes, built from nothing but the human habit of turning toward each other when things went wrong. The chamber was silent when it ended. Brick said nothing for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was different, flatter. The argument had gone out of it. "I still need a number," he said. "I know," Orvin said. "I have one to propose. Not a power index score. A different kind of number entirely." Teva stood. She had prepared for this part. She had spent the last 2 weeks drafting the proposal while Orvin wrote the main report. She called it the continuance index. Not a measure of what a species could do. A measure of demonstrated capacity to persist, adapt, and choose to help others at cost to themselves, under pressure, without guarantee of reward, over time. "It is harder to measure than strength," she said. "It requires long observation. It cannot be taken from a single probe reading. But it is, I believe, a more honest description of what a species actually is than anything we currently record." She paused. "For the baseline reference point of the continuance index, I recommend humanity. Score 1. All other species to be measured in relation to them." No one in the chamber objected loudly. A few looked at their datapads. One very old Caselli delegate in the back row, who had been a member of the Union Council for longer than most species have been members, made a quiet sound that might have been approval. Bricks did not vote against it. After the session, Halko filed his retirement paperwork. He had been planning to retire in the spring anyway. The timing was coincidental. In the final notes field of the retirement form, which most agents left blank, he wrote, "In 40 years, I measured 41 species. I was not prepared for the 41st. I do not believe any instrument we currently possess is adequate for the task. And I say this as the person who has used all of them. I recommend the Union stop trying to reduce humanity to a number and instead ensure they remain our allies permanently and without condition. This is the most strategic recommendation I have made in 4 decades. I mean it seriously." That he submitted the form and went to find Sora because he wanted to try the coffee before he left. She made him a cup. He tasted it and was quiet for a moment. "It is strange," he said, "bitter and warm at the same time. Most things worth having are," she said. 3 months later, the GMA deployed a new measurement drone into human space. It was the most advanced instrument the Authority had ever constructed. It had been specifically rebuilt to handle output ranges far beyond anything the old probes could read. The engineering team had spent 6 weeks on it. They were confident. The drone lasted 4 days before returning data flagged as outside measurable range. Orvin looked at the readout for a long time. Then, for the first time in 11 years, he laughed. A short sound, quiet, surprised out of him. He set the readout down. He marked the file with a single status note, expected. Ongoing study recommended. There is no rush. That he closed the file and went to make himself a cup of coffee. Sora had left a small bag of it on his desk 3 weeks ago with a note that said, for when you need it, he had been saving it for the right moment. This seemed close enough.